Let's dive into one of the boldest ideas in biblical archaeology. What if Saul and David, the first kings of Israel, didn't live in the Iron Age at all? What if their world belongs instead to the Middle Bronze Age, centuries earlier, among towering city-states and bronze-clad warriors? We've been taught that Saul and David reigned around the 11th and 10th centuries before the Common Era, that is, BCE. But cracks in the archaeological timeline suggest something startling. Their stories may echo a far older age, one of chariots, massive ramparts, and bronze swords. So strap in. We're heading back, even earlier than you imagine, perhaps as early as the late 15th to early 14th century BCE. Let's begin with the story as you probably know it. Saul is chosen as Israel's first king. He's tall, strong, yet tormented. He rallies tribes against Israel's enemies, but falls on his own sword after he's defeated by the Philistines at Mount Gilboa. Then comes David, the shepherd who slays a giant, the poet who plays the harp for Saul, the outlaw who hides in caves, and finally, the king who conquers Jerusalem, expands the kingdom, and dreams of a temple for his God. Traditionally, this all takes place in the Iron Age, around 1050 to 970 BCE, for both Saul and David. Archaeologists call this Iron 1 and Iron 2A. And why that dating? Because the text mentions iron weapons, because the Philistines, sea peoples from the Aegean, appear after 1200 BCE, and because the Bible credits Solomon, David's son, with building monumental cities like Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer, dated by archaeologists to the 10th century BCE. But here's where the trouble begins. You see, excavations at Jerusalem show little evidence of a great Iron Age capital. There are no massive palaces from David's time, no sprawling Iron Age walls or fortifications from the 10th century. In fact, Iron Age Jerusalem looks more like a sleepy hillside village. And those famous Solomonic gates at Hatzor and Megiddo, well, many scholars now say they're actually later, built in the 9th century BCE, maybe under King Ahab, not King Solomon. So the archaeology doesn't quite match the grandeur of the biblical text, which raises a sharp choice. Maybe David and Solomon were only minor hill chieftains, later inflated by writers into kings of legend. Or maybe we're looking in the wrong time period altogether. And that's where the Middle Bronze Age theory steps in like a thunderbolt. The Middle Bronze Age ran from about 2000 to perhaps 1550 BCE, or some would say even later. And let me tell you, this was no backwater. Canaan in this era was a patchwork of city-states. Each had its own king, its palace, its gods, its armies. And these weren't flimsy mud huts. We're talking monumental fortifications, colossal ramparts of packed earth lined with stone, topped with massive walls, towering six-chambered gates, palatial residences. And Jericho, ringed with immense earthworks. Hatzor, a metropolis, the largest city in northern Canaan. Shechem, guarded by a fortress temple with walls 20 feet thick. This was the world of grand architecture and powerful rulers, a world of bronze weapons and chariot warfare, a world of shifting alliances and constant conflict. Now, doesn't that sound an awful lot like the world of Saul and David? So let's bring Saul into the picture. The Bible introduces him like this.
There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, and he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. From his shoulders upward he was taller than any of the people.
Here was a tall warrior king, the kind of man who could lead an army into battle. And that's exactly what he does again and again against Moabites, Ammonites, Amalekites, Edomites, and of course, the Philistines. But notice the detail. The Bible says Israel had no blacksmiths because
the Philistines said, "Lest the Hebrews make swords or spears."
So Saul's men fought with farm tools, while Philistines had the advantage in weaponry. Now, this doesn't fit a mature Iron Age, but it fits perfectly in the Middle Bronze Age, when iron was rare, almost non-existent, and bronze was the main metal of war. Archaeology backs this up. Hoards from sites like Byblos and Ugarit, bronze swords, spears, daggers, and armor, chariots rolling across the battlefield. Saul's world sounds Bronze Age to the core. And then there's David. Not just a warrior, but a builder of a kingdom. He captures Jerusalem, expands his territory, brings the Ark of the Covenant into the city, rules from his fortress. But here's the rub. Iron Age Jerusalem was tiny. Archaeology reveals only a modest hilltop settlement, not a city worthy of a king. Middle Bronze Age Jerusalem, though. Now, that was a fortress city. Massive ramparts, a water system still visible today, feeding the Gihon Spring. A city worth capturing. A city fit for a king. And what about those other cities? Hatzor, Megiddo, Gezer. Their great fortifications belong not to the Iron Age, but to the Middle Bronze Age. Gigantic walls, monumental gates, palaces. If David and Solomon lived then, well, suddenly the archaeology lines up. The grandeur of the biblical kingdom actually makes sense. Now, let's revisit one of the most famous moments in the Bible. David versus Goliath.
And he had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had greaves of bronze upon his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron.
Bronze helmet, bronze armor, bronze javelin, and only the spear tip of iron. That's a Bronze Age warrior. If this story were set in the Iron Age, why stress bronze? By then, iron was increasingly common. But in the Middle Bronze Age, Iron was exotic, almost magical, something rare and terrifying. A spear tip of iron would be worthy of a giant. David versus Goliath is practically screaming, "This is a Bronze Age story." But hold on. What about the Philistines? Everybody knows they arrived after 1200 BCE as one of the sea peoples, right? If Saul and David fought them, doesn't that lock the story in the Iron Age? Well, not necessarily. You see, the Bible may use Philistines as a retroactive label. Later writers applied the name they knew, Philistines, to describe older enemies of Israel on the coast. In other words, the Philistines of David's day may not have been the same Philistines of later centuries. Second, Egyptian texts, even before 1200, mention groups that sound suspiciously like proto-Philistines: sea raiders, mercenaries, coastal invaders. They could have been remembered as Philistines by biblical authors, even if they weren't exactly the same people. So, does the presence of Philistines force us into the Iron Age? Well, not necessarily. And here's where Egyptian records add some spice. The execration texts, magical curses from around 1900 to 1800 BCE, list the enemies of Egypt. Who do we see? Well, the rulers of Jerusalem are there: Shechem, Hatzor, Ashkelon, powerful Canaanite kings commanding fortified cities. That sounds eerily like the biblical landscape. Rival kings, fortified cities, shifting alliances. If Saul and David lived then, they would have been part of this world, Canaanite rulers carving out power under the shadow of mighty Egypt. So, why does the Bible place Saul and David in the Iron Age if their stories fit the Middle Bronze Age? Think of memory. Centuries later, when scribes wrote the histories, they projected their own world backwards. They knew Philistines as Iron Age foes. They knew iron weapons. They knew their own towns. So they clothed the past in the garb of the present. But behind the Iron Age surface lies an older memory, a Bronze Age memory. If Saul and David truly belong to the Bronze Age, then the Bible isn't just myth. It's a layered record of memory and history. It means Israel's first kings weren't just rustic hill chiefs, but figures in the grand stage of Bronze Age Canaan. Commanders of armies, conquerors of cities, rivals to Canaanite kings. It means the grandeur of the biblical account may reflect real history, but set in a different century than we thought. So, picture it. Saul, taller than all his men, leading bronze-clad warriors into battle. David, a young shepherd, facing a giant with a bronze helmet and an iron-tipped spear. Jerusalem, not a backwater village, but a mighty citadel on a Bronze Age hill. In the final analysis, the Middle Bronze Age may just be the hidden stage where Israel's earliest kings first strode.